When we talk about the ACI physical model, we're really talking about how do we configure the physical components of an ACI fabric, such as the switch or the interfaces, and applying VLANs to interfaces. By the end of this nugget, we're going to have a good overview of what the ACI physical model looks like. An important goal of ACI is to automate the data center environment. And what this means is really to, first of all, simplify the number of tasks that we need to accomplish, and second of all, reduce the number of steps. Because the goal is to eliminate errors made inside the data center. And so the more simple the process and the less amount of steps that we have to complete, the greater likelihood that I don't make a mistake when I make a change. Now that said, generally speaking, this is applied to configurations at scale. And so when we're thinking about reducing the number of steps, we really think about it at a larger scale rather than, say, maybe we have 2 switches in our data center. Well, what do I mean by that? Well, let's take a look at the steps needed to add a VLAN to an interface. In the traditional, we'll call it NXOS model, what would we do? Well, we have to create the VLAN. So let's say we're making VLAN 100, and we want to apply it to interface Ethernet 1/1. So we punch in these commands, VLAN 100, interface Ethernet 1/1, and then what? Switch port, access, VLAN 100. All right, we probably know this by heart for those of us who have done it a lot. And in these 3 simple commands, we have added VLAN 100 to an interface. And that was pretty simple to do. Now let's look at it from an ACI perspective. How do we do this in ACI? We just want to add VLAN 100 to an interface. Well, the first step is to create a VLAN pool. And of course, we'll add VLAN 100 into that VLAN pool. And then we'd want to map that VLAN pool to a domain, whether it's physical or virtual, and we'll cover that throughout the course of the skill. And from there, we use an attachable access entity profile to assign that to a policy group, interface policy group specifically. Now from there, we apply it to the interface profile, and the interface profile gets mapped to a switch profile. So no problem, right? I can't even say that with a straight face. So we had 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 steps. And even we could say, well, okay, 6 compared to maybe the 3 over here, that's not so bad. Except we know that each one of these steps is going to take significantly longer than running a command. So why in the world does it take so long with an ACI to map out a single interface for a single VLAN? And to get the answer, we need to think of this a little bit differently. What if I had to configure VLAN 100 on interface 1/1 on 100 switches? So I have to do this 100 times on 100 different switches. How many interface commands do I have to enter? Well, 300, okay. So I have to log into 100 switches and do 300 commands. And by the way, is that simplifying and reducing the number of steps? Of course not. The likelihood of me making a mistake at some point is pretty high. Now what about ACI? Because we weren't exactly reducing steps by going from 3 commands to 6 different processes. However, if I have to apply this to 100 switches, how many times do I have to do this process? Well, I really still only need to do all of these processes once. Because by the time I have a switch profile created, I can then apply that to 100 different switches. This is how I simplify and how I reduce the number of steps. In fact, the likelihood that I make a mistake in this process is enormously small compared to the process on the left. Because there's no way for me to accidentally add VLAN 101 to an interface, whereas the process on the left, all I have to do is accidentally type in VLAN 101 because I'm going so fast and I don't even notice that I pasted the wrong thing in, or I fat fingered, or whatever the situation is, and now there's an error out on my network. So sometimes with ACI, we're taking the number of steps that we have from NXOS and increasing it for a small environment. But for a large environment, we're drastically reducing the amount of work and effort it takes to create configuration, and by the way, good quality configuration at that, reducing the errors in our environment. So now we have a good overview of what the ACI physical model looks like. In this nugget, we covered the fact that ACI focuses on handling large tasks at scale. And as such, maybe if we have a smaller environment, we might go through a lot of steps just to apply things to a couple of switches. But in larger environments, ACI really shines because creating configuration once, and a good configuration that we validated, can be spread out to as many switches as we desire within the environment. I hope this has been informative for you, and I'd like to thank you for viewing.